Hello everyone, I've been working on a new series called Godzilla Wars. I hope you enjoy it. Without further wait, here's Godzilla Wars. While battling the Japanese in the Pacific, the US military encounters a live dinosaur. Unknown to the world and having survived millions of years, the Marshall Islands are now home to many prehistoric beasts. During a battle on one of the islands, Japanese and US forces encounter a monster. The beast attacks both the US and Japanese soldiers as it defends its home. The Japanese troops nicknamed the monster Gojira or Godzilla after an ancient Japanese legend. With the dinosaur being 12 meters tall and 60 tons, the soldiers on the ground are no match. Defeated, the US and Japanese forces retreat from the island. Shortly after the war, the US military returns to the Marshall Islands with two objectives. The first is to continue testing the hydrogen bomb, and the second is to kill any prehistoric creature located on the islands. Hoping to kill the beast, the United States conducts over 20 tests throughout the area. Weeks later, soldiers return to the island where they encountered the dinosaur. The troops search the area but find nothing. They dig a small ditch for the bomb debris. Once covered, the men head out. With no monsters in sight and thinking their mission was a success, the Navy clears out of the area. Days later, Godzilla emerges out of the jungle completely transformed. Now standing at a whopping 80 meters tall, Godzilla lets out a loud roar and walks along the beach. Godzilla wades into the ocean and starts to swim. Underwater, Godzilla finds a place to rest in peace. 9 years later, Godzilla wakes up from his hibernation. Hungry and craving nuclear energy, Godzilla begins to head out. A few weeks later, strange disturbances start being reported throughout the Pacific Ocean. Cargo ships, cruise liners, and fishing boats all lost or destroyed. The Japanese government is keeping an eye on the situation, but as the reports move closer to the mainland, they start to worry. So it's decided to have the Navy patrol the waters. At the same time, the United States is also paying attention to the situation in the Pacific. They send their own fleet to the area for a private investigation. The US government decides that should a monster actually appear, the military will lure it to sea and kill it with one of their latest nuclear bombs underwater. After a week, Navy ships enter the Pacific Ocean and begin conducting their investigation. However, after days of searching, they find nothing. The US determines that the reports are simply mere hoax and attempt to downplay the situation. A few weeks go by, and then one night Godzilla enters Tokyo Bay underwater and surfaces. Godzilla sees the city lights in the distance. Intrigued, Godzilla wades over to them. People nearby on a wharf see the monster and scream in terror. Godzilla looks at the wharf and then blasts it with his atomic breath, causing a massive explosion. Godzilla roars and heads back underwater and swims to the coast. Godzilla erupts from the water and comes ashore in Yokohama. Godzilla crushes everything in his path. His long tail smashes into buildings. Godzilla fires his atomic breath and the city erupts into a sea of flames. Caught off guard, the JSDF swings into action. Tanks roll down the street and begin firing at Godzilla. Godzilla roars at the military and then obliterates them with his atomic breath. Godzilla walks through Yokohama, tearing through buildings left and right. After rampaging for hours, Godzilla heads back into the water. The monster wades into sea and heads underwater to rest at the bottom of Tokyo Bay. The next day, the United States gets a report from Japan detailing the attack. The United States urges Japan to keep Godzilla a secret for now. The United States sends troops to Japan to conduct another investigation for the government. The US military arrives in Tokyo, hoping to squash rumors about a giant fire-breathing monster erupting out of the sea. Once set up in the area, military crews scan the bay but are unable to find anything. Days go by without a Godzilla sighting until one night. Godzilla swims back into Tokyo Bay undetected and erupts from the water. Godzilla roars and moves towards the shore. Caught off guard, the military scrambles into action and launches an attack on Godzilla. Hoping to slow the monster down and divert him away from Tokyo, the US Navy manages to set up a blockade. Unfortunately, Godzilla easily destroys the blockade with his atomic breath and comes ashore. Godzilla makes it into Tokyo and begins destroying buildings left and right. Godzilla destroys everything in his path as he explodes buildings with his atomic breath. Tanks and jets move in but are no use. Godzilla quickly destroys them. Godzilla swats the jets out of the sky with his atomic breath and continues on with his rampage. Tokyo turns into a sea of flames as Godzilla uses his atomic breath to destroy building after building. Godzilla walks through the Capitol building on his way towards the heart of Tokyo. Meanwhile, a train attempts to escape with civilians, but Godzilla sees the train, he picks it up off the tracks. Godzilla holds the train and then drops it onto the ground. Godzilla roars and continues on. He crosses the street with his feet as he enters the heart of Tokyo. Godzilla begins leveling the area with his atomic breath. After hours of devastation, the United States and Japan have finished devising a plan. Jets fly in overhead and use light bombs to lead Godzilla out of the city. Godzilla follows the light and leaves the city. Once in the bay, Godzilla knocks the jets out with his atomic breath and heads off. Tired, Godzilla rests at the bottom of the bay. The next day, scuba divers find Godzilla resting at the bottom of Tokyo Bay. The US government decides to lure Godzilla back to the Marshall Islands. There, they will detonate an upgraded nuclear bomb underwater. The next day in Tokyo Bay, the Navy drops a small bomb in the area Godzilla is resting. The Navy successfully wakes Godzilla up and lures him out of the area. Godzilla chases after the ships, and after a few days, he ends up back near the Marshall Islands. As Godzilla moves into the area, the US military gets the bomb into position as Godzilla arrives. Godzilla catches up with the Navy and battles with them in the water near his island. Godzilla explodes ships with his atomic breath. Godzilla heads underwater to escape the area and the nuclear bomb is ordered to be deployed. The last ship moves into position and troops head underwater to deploy the bomb. The team moves in on Godzilla and detonates the bomb. Successful, a large mushroom cloud erupts from underwater. The military waits for everything to settle. After some time, the military combs through the area and is unable to find a single soul. It's determined that the upgraded weaponry managed to disintegrate Godzilla and the bomb crew. Victorious, the military heads out. The United States government decides to cover up the Godzilla attacks and downplays them as hoax or rumors. Days later, a massive storm hits the island where the soldiers first discovered Godzilla. The storm is so powerful that it breaks free the top of the soldier's pit. Tons of radioactive materials are freed into the world. Some particles sink to the bottom of the ocean. They land on an unconscious Godzilla and revive him. Mutated even larger thanks to the US's upgraded nuclear weapon, Godzilla has now been revived by the radioactive particles from the first test in 1945. For now, Godzilla rests. 30 years after Godzilla attacked Japan, many in the country have managed to rebuild and forget. On the other hand, while the public may have forgotten, the government has not. Over the years, more and more resources have been dedicated to understanding and fighting Godzilla. A new monitoring and defense system have been instituted, as well as a new branch of the government dedicated to fighting Godzilla. Their name is G-Force. To achieve their goals, the government and G-Force have two top-secret projects. The first is the Super X, an aerial fighting vehicle which is ready for battle at any moment's notice. The second is Mechagodzilla, a robot fighting machine that will soon be ready. After years of hibernation underwater, a massive earthquake strikes an area near the Marshall Islands. The quake radiates, impacting the area Godzilla is resting in. An underwater volcano opens underneath Godzilla as he wakes up from his slumber. Ready for revenge, Godzilla starts to head out, only to be swallowed by the volcano. With the storm over, a UN expedition crew heads to the Marshall Islands to survey the area. While surveying one of the islands, the crew notices a hatched egg on the beach. The team decides to stay and set up a small base on the beach. A few days go by and the crew encounters an irradiated pteranodon kaiju. The monster flies overhead and then lands. Rodan lets out a loud roar and then uses his wings to generate large gusts of wind. Stunned, the crew retreats back to their helicopter and evacuate the island. One of the members claims to see more flying monsters in the distance. The crew manages to escape and report their findings when they return home. The government dismisses the claims, but privately raise the alarm and send a G-Force team to the Marshall Islands. 2 weeks go by and a massive earthquake strikes Japan, triggering an eruption at Mount Fuji. The military moves in to evacuate civilians as the government prepares for Mount Fuji to erupt. Another earthquake strikes and Mount Fuji explodes. Imagery comes in from the area. Shocked, officials watch as Godzilla exits the volcano. After being swallowed by the underwater volcano, Godzilla managed to swim through the lava and exited through Mount Fuji. Godzilla leaves the volcano and begins walking through the countryside. The military moves in to fight the monster. Mutated again by the Americans, Godzilla now stands at a staggering 100 meters tall. His atomic breath is even more powerful and wipes out the incoming forces. Godzilla continues on toward Tokyo and the military estimates he will reach the city within 3 hours. With scientists still needing time to work on Mechagodzilla's software, the Super X is currently Tokyo's only defense. The Japanese update the Americans on the situation. It's decided to try and lure Godzilla towards the coast and away from the city. The Americans launch bombers to push Godzilla off course. Godzilla obliterates them easily. Stunned, the military falls back. Tokyo begins to evacuate and the Super X moves into position in the city. Tanks roll in as the military sets up to fight Godzilla. It's also decided that there should be a backup plan should the Super X and Mechagodzilla fail. The government decides in event of failure, Godzilla will be led to Mount Mahara by light bombs. Once in the crater of the volcano, a controlled explosion will trap him. With Godzilla trapped in the crater, he will be immobile and unable to get away through the lava. A team heads to the island and begins setting up explosives around the crater. With an hour left to go and Tokyo not fully evacuated, tanks move into the countryside to slow Godzilla down. However, their effort is futile. That night, Godzilla enters Tokyo. Godzilla walks through buildings as he makes his way into the city. Godzilla lights up the streets, destroying buildings and tanks. The Super X moves in on Godzilla during his rampage. Godzilla walks through a populated area, crushing everything in his path. Godzilla walks through buildings and then halts when he sees the Super X. Godzilla roars and engages the Super X. The Super X fires missiles. Godzilla fires his atomic breath. Godzilla and the Super X go back and forth, exchanging attacks. The Super X attempts to reflect Godzilla's atomic breath back at the monster. But after constant use, the diamond mirror is damaged. The Super X takes cover and is forced to fall back. Godzilla moves deeper into Tokyo and resumes his rampage. Godzilla fires his atomic breath, destroying a row of buildings. Meanwhile, the G-Force team arrives on the Marshall Islands and stumbles upon Rodan battling with what looks like a giant larva. In the waters near the island, the larva shoots its silk attack at Rodan. Rodan flies overhead and rains down his atomic breath. The Navy moves into position and orders the Air Force to get Rodan's attention. With Rodan distracted by the Air Force, the larva heads out undetected. The military sets up a base of operations and contacts the jets in the air. G-Force gets an idea to use Rodan to lead Godzilla to Mount Mahara and use the volcano to kill both monsters. The jets engage Rodan in the sky and gain his attention. Rodan follows the jets and will be in Tokyo soon thanks to his high-flying speed. speeds. Meanwhile, at Mount Mahara, the team has finished laying explosives and have set up a base of operations. Back in Japan, Godzilla continues his rampage in Tokyo, destroying everything in his path. The Super X re-engages Godzilla and the two go back and forth. Godzilla fires his atomic breath. The Super X weaves through buildings firing missiles. Eventually, the Super X uses its diamond mirror to reflect Godzilla's atomic breath. The mirror is damaged more, forcing the Super X to stop using it. Godzilla fires his atomic breath at the Super X. The Super X attempts to dodge the attack, but fails. Critically damaged, the Super X crashes into a building. Unable to get back into the air, the crew analyzes the damage and attempts to repair the propulsion system. Meanwhile, Godzilla continues his rampage and is unstoppable. Godzilla destroys Tokyo Tower with his atomic breath. Godzilla walks through the city, destroying everything in his path. Buildings explode throughout the city as Godzilla unleashes his atomic breath. Godzilla destroys Tokyo for what seems like hours until jets move in and Rodan enters the city. Rodan nears Godzilla and gets its attention. Godzilla fires his atomic breath at Rodan. Rodan fires back at Godzilla, causing an explosion, pushing Godzilla down. Godzilla gets back up and fights Rodan. The monsters go back and forth for a while. Godzilla and Rodan destroy Tokyo as they fight. Thankfully, Mechagodzilla is finally ready and is launched into battle. In the middle of Godzilla and Rodan's fight, Mechagodzilla arrives in the area. Godzilla fires his atomic breath at Rodan. Rodan fires back. Mechagodzilla fires his Mega Buster at both monsters. Rodan falls from the sky. Godzilla gets knocked into a building. Mechagodzilla moves in on Godzilla and fires again. On the ground, Godzilla fires his atomic breath and knocks Mechagodzilla back. Godzilla and Rodan get back up and fire together at Mechagodzilla, causing him to crash into a building, setting off another huge explosion. Rodan fires from overhead, pinning Mechagodzilla down. Mechagodzilla explodes out of the debris and gets back up. Godzilla charges Mechagodzilla and fires his atomic breath. Mechagodzilla dodges the attack and fires his shock cables into Godzilla. Godzilla falls to the ground. Rodan flies overhead and fires his atomic breath at Mechagodzilla, but it does nothing. Mechagodzilla shocks Godzilla. Godzilla wails in pain. Rodan dives down from the sky and attacks Mechagodzilla, freeing Godzilla. On the ground, Godzilla fires back at Mechagodzilla, knocking him down. Godzilla gets back up. Mechagodzilla fires his plasma grenade at Rodan and smashes him into a building. Mechagodzilla moves in on Rodan to finish him. He fires his Mega Buster repeatedly at it down Rodan. Godzilla fires his atomic breath at Mechagodzilla, knocking him away. Mechagodzilla fires back and their beams collide. Godzilla overpowers Mechagodzilla, causing his circuitry to spark inside. Godzilla picks up Mechagodzilla and throws him into a building. Godzilla roars as Mechagodzilla attempts to get back up. Rodan regains himself and takes to the skies. He flies over a downed Mechagodzilla. Godzilla and Rodan fire their attacks at Mechagodzilla, critically injuring him. Out of commission, Mechagodzilla lays in the debris, unable to get up as Godzilla and Rodan destroy Tokyo. However, the Super X team manages to fix the vehicle's propulsion system and take to the sky. Instead of using the jets, it's decided to use the Super X to lead Godzilla and Rodan to Mount Mahara. The crew on Mount Mahara is ordered to get ready as the Super X moves in. The Super X engages the monsters and manages to get their attention. Using flare bombs, the Super X leads the monsters out of the city. Godzilla and Rodan fire their atomic breath as the Super X attempts to dodge the attacks. Eventually, the monsters walk out of the city and enter Tokyo Bay. Following the Super X, Godzilla swims in the ocean. Rodan flies in the sky, making their way to Mount Mahara. After traveling for some time, the Super X arrives on the island. Rodan flies nearby and Godzilla comes ashore. The Super X malfunctions and fires a missile instead of a flare at Godzilla, enraging him. Godzilla fires his atomic breath. The Super X opens its diamond mirror to reflect the attack. Godzilla fires and destroys the Super X. The Super X explodes as jets move in to get Rodan's attention. Jets continue leading Rodan towards the crater, which gets Godzilla's attention. Godzilla heads up the volcano as the monsters close in on the crater. Once on the ridge, Godzilla stumbles and falls into the trap. Rodan flies overhead and then at the split second changes direction. Taken by surprise, the jets attempt to do evasive maneuvers but are destroyed by Rodan. Rodan begins heading back to the Marshall Islands. Back in the crater, the controlled explosion goes off. Godzilla is trapped and the world is safe. For now. Rodan returns to the Marshall Islands and in the distance sees smoke coming from G-Force's destroyed base. He lands and is greeted by some of the other Rodans living on the island. In the aftermath of Godzilla's attack, the Navy sets up a perimeter around the Marshall Islands and checkpoints are established to keep all ships away from the area. Meanwhile, in Tokyo, crews clear debris and salvage the wreckage of both the Super X and Mechagodzilla. As city debris is removed, Japanese and American forces discover G-cells and collect samples. With the revelation of Godzilla and Rodan, governments around the world deliberate on how to maintain life in a world where giant monsters exist. During this process, the United States and Japan convince the world that with the discovery of G-cells, their scientists will be able to harness the cells' power into something capable of killing the monsters once and for all. Persuaded for now, the world waits for Japan and the United States to yield results. This announcement spurs intense competition between the two countries, which could have disastrous consequences if corners are cut during the testing phase. Currently, both Japan and the United States are still in the process of understanding Godzilla and his cell anatomy. In Kyoto, Japanese scientists are hard at work experimenting with G-cells. One project in particular is focused on learning about G-cells as well as their ability to multiply and grow. At the same time, the United States is working on two top-secret projects. The first focuses on G-cells. Scientists believe the cells will provide information on Godzilla's weak points. To complement this work, Project Mogira is also under development. The goal of Project Mogira is to create a versatile fighting machine tailored to Godzilla's weaknesses. To achieve this, one of the concepts for Mogira suggests creating a cyborg by infusing G-cells into the mech. With knowledge of Godzilla's weaknesses and powers, Mogira has the potential to be even more powerful than Mechagodzilla.